Hello, my name is Cheryl Hicks, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Toilet Board Coalition. We are a business platform accelerating the sanitation economy. We've been supporting business solutions for sanitation and hygiene over the past 5 years. And this interview series is to share and shed a spotlight on the various business solutions for sanitation and hygiene that are ready for scale. And one of the most exciting new developments in the area of sanitation and hygiene is container-based sanitation. And container-based sanitation businesses have created an alliance called the CBSA, the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance. And I'm really pleased to have with me here today the chair of that alliance, Kory Russel, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the objectives of that alliance and get into some detail around the solution of container-based sanitation business models. Kory, can you tell us about the CBSA?
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. It's really exciting to be doing this. So there's a couple of things with the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance. It is an alliance that consists of 7 organizations as full members currently, with 1 affiliate member. Started out with 6 members, specifically X-Runner, who operates in Peru, Soil, who operates in Haiti, Clean Team, who operates in Ghana, Sanitation and Sanergy, who are both in Kenya, and Luwat, who is in Madagascar and also does operations in the UK. And then we've recently added Sanitation First, who operates in India. And we have Mosan, who's an affiliate and just starting to scale things up in Guatemala. So the real idea behind the CBSA was there was sort of an understanding, and this goes back a long time with sort of in collaboration with the TBC. So actually our first formation was at the first TBC meeting in Mumbai in November of 2016. But there were a number of these organizations that were exploring container-based sanitation in its early forms. And it became obvious that there was a lot of reinventing of the wheel, and folks were struggling with the same sorts of problems. So the idea with the CBSA was to get folks in the same room, get on the same page, have learning sharing going on between organizations, and at the same time sort of outsource and collaboratively work together on these bigger problems that are beyond just one organization or their local issues that they could be dealing with, and sort of create an economy of scale to tackle these larger, more sector-wide problems that they were engaging with. You know, some of those can be regulation, policy, financing, how to optimize the business model, tools, digital tools, different things like that, that really at a sector level can be tackled much more efficiently than each organization individually. And so the CBSA is a way to do a lot of that work together across these different locations around the world, and also engage with sort of a unified voice with the bigger players in the sector, whether that be the WHO, whether that be the World Bank, whether that be any of these sort of big players in the sanitation sector. There's sort of a place for that to happen. And beyond that, there's really an understanding that because CBS as an idea, container-based sanitation, is so new, a lot of what folks are doing is sort of in the research startup phase. And so there's a lot of learnings that need to happen. And so by using the CBSA as sort of a platform to do a lot of this sort of research level sorts of inquiry, such as we've been doing a cost effectiveness analysis the last couple of years with a number of the groups, and we've been looking at the climate impacts, sort of these questions that any one individual organization would have a hard time really tackling on their own, but we can get some really good learning across the whole sector. And so that's kind of the goal of the CBSA, is to do that. And then beyond that, you know, beyond just taking the CBS organizations that are out there and trying to grow them and get them to a scale that's significant, it's to help shepherd new CBS organizations and foster new services around the world wherever that's possible.
Thank you, Kory. And, you know, I think that the CBSA group, the companies that you mentioned, them in themselves have also been playing a leadership role in growing the sector and, you know, supporting businesses, you know, beyond their container-based sanitation colleagues. So it's a really special group, and they're really pioneering these new solutions. So thank you for that explanation of the CBSA's goals and outlook. Can you talk a little bit more about the container-based sanitation solution? We get a lot of inquiries at the Toilet Board Coalition, from those looking for new sanitation solutions, and we see it being applied broadly from densely populated urban areas, also to plantation settings, for example. Can you talk a little bit and explain the innovation and explain why this is a better alternative to what many communities have now?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things to think about is really the ways in which we provide sanitation as a whole worldwide right now. We tend to break it down into two different solutions, and that is either waterborne sanitation, pipes in the ground, sewers with a centralized treatment facility, or we have on-site sanitation, which is pit latrines, and then septic tanks, things that tend to keep it right there. And what CBS does is it sort of fills that third gap between those two, which is to collect the waste in a sealable container that then, once it is sealed, it is placed into some sort of transport, whether that be a cart or a truck or a tuk-tuk, whatever that is, and then taken to a centralized treatment facility. And the big difference here, right, is that when you're doing that, that means that you don't have to have permanent infrastructure in people's homes, which means that especially in informal settlements where land tenure is a big problem, where people are asked to move at the drop of the hat, whether because rent is due or they lost the tenure to their land. For instance, just recently, Soil, who works in Haiti, one of the communities they work in, the entire community was just bulldozed overnight without warning, right? And so the folks that are on their service can actually, in their new homes where they're moving to, they can continue the service, right? They haven't lost their toilet per se. So that's one of the bonuses of it, is that it's very mobile and flexible and can be deployed very rapidly. The other big bonus of it is that because you're not dunking the feces in water, you have a much easier time turning that waste into a resource. So whether that be turning it into fuel, whether that be turning it into compost, into feed for animals, whatever that end product is, it's much easier if you don't have to treat all that water that comes with it, right? So if you're thinking about a typical wastewater treatment facility, about 99% of the volume of whatever moves through that treatment facility is water that has to be treated, right? Just to get to that little bit of feces. And here we don't have to treat that water. We can just work on turning that feces into a resource. And so it has the potential, and this is one of the, you mentioned a lot of the special companies that are in this group. And one of the things that a lot of them have been innovating on is this idea of waste to resource, in doing some really innovative stuff around that. And so that's one of the things that's sort of inherent in CBS. It doesn't have to be, but it often is, because you don't have the feces in liquid that has to be separated before it can be changed. And the other thing is that it's just much cheaper to deploy and get out there, because you don't have to put in a bunch of permanent infrastructure. So it allows you to serve communities that would typically be priced out of other solutions. And we also get folks that really like the service and therefore become sort of they like it better than sort of the typical solutions that you would get there, like a pit latrine, which can often be quite smelly and problematic from an emptying standpoint.
Thank you, Kory. And in the sanitation economy vision that the Toilet Board Coalition is advocating with our members, one of the key differentiators of the alternatives of models like this, key to that last point you were making around cost, is the cost of value proposition, because sanitation has come at a cost to cities, to governments. historically, and these new solutions and the solutions of the sanitation and economy are solutions that have the opportunity to cost recover because of the revenue generating opportunities, created by recognizing that the waste has a value. Can you talk, a little bit more about that side of the business, the revenue generating side, and some of the applications for container-based sanitation in terms of some of the resources that can be created out of the waste?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, you can really think of CBS as having two sources of revenue in general. The first is user fees, which are typically far lower than, say, a sewer connection or having to build your own setup. But generally, because many of these organizations are tailored towards serving some of the lowest income individuals in some of the largest cities, you're not going to be fully cost recovering if you're just going on user fees, right? You're going to price out some individuals. So a way to offset that is then to turn that waste into some sort of resource that you can bring in revenue from resale. And that's really going to depend on the markets that are available in the country that you're working or the market that you're working in, right? So for instance, in Haiti, soil's turning their waste into compost and then selling it to agribusiness or to smallhold farmers with the idea that they can recoup some of that cost and improve agricultural yields from that. In the case of Sanergy, they're actually also collecting organic food waste in the communities. They're mixing that together with the fecal matter, and then they're growing black soldier fly larvae on that waste, which consumes it, and then they can sell, after they've baked those little maggots, they make sure they're good and clean, and then they can sell that as a high quality feed for chickens, pigs, livestock, that sort of thing. And then with any remaining waste, then they actually compost that waste, and they can sell that as a soil amendment as well. In the case of Sanitation, they're actually taking the waste and mixing it 50% with other flower waste from the flower growing industry. So just sort of any sort of carbon source, 50-50, and then they press that after it's been sanitized, right? And they press it and turn it into a biofuel, right? So that offsets coal or charcoal in boilers or in people's cooking. So it's stopping deforestation. It's also stopping the production of greenhouse gas emissions from the burning of fossil fuels. Luwat is using biodigestion to create natural gas, methane. So in that way, they're offsetting the production or the burning of fossil fuels. And there's also been some exploration around the idea that you could actually be taking this waste and using it in plantations for carbon sinks, right? So there's been some really exciting work by some researchers, especially with soil on this, to look at what the carbon reduction when putting compost just on soil. So one of the things that we're really looking at is when we do these sorts of things, we're actually far less, there are far less carbon emissions from these sorts of waste to resource at the back end and from the collection process, which means that you could actually be providing sanitation at the same time you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so there might be a whole funding mechanism there through carbon credits. So that's something we're actively exploring and doing research around right now.
Thanks, Kory. The multiple benefits of these circular sanitation closed loop models, and really, as we see it, a key to the sanitation economy and that opportunity to turn the cost of sanitation into net value proposition. So thank you for outlining that. And container-based sanitation and these benefits, have been really increasing in demand, increasing in acceptance around the world pre-COVID-19, and as we face this global health and hygiene crisis. What have you been finding? What have the businesses been finding? How have they been affected by COVID? Have they been affected, or how are things accelerating for the sector?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, in all cases where it was necessary, the organizations in the CBSA have been able to get status as as an essential service. So one of the worries early on when this started was that they would get shut down with all the stay-at-home orders and that sort of thing. And fortunately, in all cases, they've been allowed to operate and either designated as essential services or told to continue to operate by governments in those areas because they're seen as such a necessary element given the pandemic situation. I think one of the things that was a concern pre-COVID, which was something that we were aware of and was even raised in the World Bank report that came out in 2019, was how would something like CBS be affected by a pandemic, because it is so reliant on labor, human labor, right? Whereas something like a sewer system, you have very little interaction from a human standpoint. And one of the things that all of these organizations have spent a lot of time doing is actually preparing for making sure that their employees are operating under the safest conditions possible. Given that we're dealing with fecal matter and disease-causing agents in all of these environments, I mean, cholera is a constant concern, and there's a number of other communicable diseases that are worrisome when you're in close proximity to feces on a daily basis, right? So most of these organizations have done a really, really good job of having a lot of personal protective equipment as part of the processes already. And so when COVID came along, it was not difficult to be in compliance with the necessary PPE and protection for the workers. And they were able to continue to operate without increased risk. What has changed is sort of the way in which they've gone about deploying their groups and their workers at composting facilities or waste processing facilities and in communities. And that's to stagger different collection periods and to rely more heavily. A lot of the organizations, and one example is Soil's been working with DataKind to create route optimization software. And they've really sort of rolled this out in the pandemic because it allows them to socially distance their collectors from each other, but still actually improve their optimization in their routes, which previously in a lot of areas had just been sort of the memory of the collectors, right? And so this allows there to be less contact between the collectors and a more efficient pickup that's safer for everyone, while still improving the efficiency and the amount of time that they have to be out there. The other thing that I think is happening that's really exciting is there is an increased demand. As people are staying home, there's a realization that I need sanitation in the home, right? So previously people could get away with going at their work or that sort of thing. And as they're having to stay home, there's a realization that whoever in the family has to stay home, they're without sanitation and they need that. And so there's actually been an increased demand for a lot of the organizations. They've seen a need for more toilets out there and more collection, and so they're trying to meet that demand. I think on the low end of the pyramid, right, the lowest income individuals, it has been hard, and there have been sort of longer grace periods and fee reductions for those most affected, loss of work, that sort of thing, where people are really on sort of that razor's edge of not having any funds available. So there's had to be some flexibility there. But in general, most of the organizations are super excited about how much traction CBS is gaining in the COVID pandemic, because people recognize the need for hand sanitizer, hygiene, water, and sanitation are just so key to stopping this pandemic. And a lot of the organizations also provide hand washing stations and that sort of thing with their toilets. And so that is a great way of producing that. I think another thing that's been really interesting is to see the acceleration the integration of sort of public health messaging and dispersal of hygiene products and products that people need. So one of the things that CVS, because it's such a high touch points with the customers, you know, at first it takes a while to build trust, especially in a lot of these communities that have been marginalized, that have basically seen things come and go and not work well and this sort of thing. It takes a while to gain the trust, but once you have that trust network that the CVS collectors are coming, they're picking it up, then they can be a distributor of public health messages. And that is one of the really difficult elements of this. So there is a lot of bad information out there about how COVID is spread, what, you know, cures and all these sorts of things. You know, I mean, we've seen it in the UK with the burning of the 5G wireless network towers, right? There's just, it's one of those things where we know very little about this at the start of it, and we're learning more things. We're making errors in the public health world, and so having a trusted source in these areas that can distribute messages, that can be that source of good data about what you need to be doing to protect yourself is key. And so that's been one of the exciting parts of that. And I think there's also been an acceleration. All organizations have been trying to use more mobile technologies in their collection, whether that be with communicating with their customers, feedback, or with mobile payments. They've all, you know, created these systems. But what we're seeing is, because people want to be socially distant because of this, is that the users are not adapting to that much more than they would have in the past. And so it's creating a sort of shift into those mobile technologies and a more reliance on those mobile technologies, which ultimately will be much more efficient and useful for scaling these businesses. So that's a really positive aspect as well.
Yeah, digitization absolutely coming much more on the agenda for sanitation. And you know, you mentioned sort of a lot of the positive acceleration, you know, and I think new openness to these alternative models because of the heightened demand. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, the what container-based sanitation companies need to really scale up and meet that demand? What do they need from the broader business community, from the broader stakeholder community?
Yeah, I think there's two things, and this kind of goes back to actually this year, really, as the pandemic was kicking off. We were in the midst of like formulating what CBSA 2.0 would be. One of the big, you know, the early days of CBSA, what we really wanted to do was put the research together and make the case that CBS was improved sanitation. And the Joint Monitoring Program actually has recognized it as improved sanitation in the most recent publications. And so looking beyond that, at okay, now that we have this verification that what's being done is up to snuff, how do we actually move that beyond, you know, we're looking at, I think, our numbers for last year were something like 157,000 users on a daily basis. That's not gonna change the landscape, right? We're all very aware of that, right? So how do we get that scaled up, sort of thing? And the thing that's, there's really sort of a couple different things that will really move it to the next level. And the first is sort of regulation and policy. So from a policy standpoint, there's legitimization, right? That it's recognized. So Kenya did this, I think 2 years ago, in their general sanitation strategy plan, where they said, look, we think container-based sanitation should be part of the suite of options for sanitation in cities around Kenya. And so that's that policy aspect, where it's actually included as something that can be done. The second part, and this still remains to be done in Kenya and really around the world, is regulation, right? And especially, and that is linked to the third part, which is financing. Is big funders or you know, business loans look at these areas. This is a very risky market, and a lack of regulation means it's that much riskier. And so if funders and financiers can see that, okay, this is accepted and it can grow, then they're more likely to jump in with innovative financing models. And so the things that we're really excited about at the CBSA are, how do we create the regulations that different governments, municipal, local, or national, can adopt, that set out that favorable environment for these services to grow and prosper. And second, how can we sort of focus on innovative sanitation financing in this sector, right? Because there's a little bit of a, you know, there's always the chicken and the egg problem. This is more that as you grow, you hit a certain point where you need a bump of financing to kind of jump to that next level and jump to that next level. And so that's what we're kind of focusing on. And the CBSA right now is working on a number of different products that'll be coming out in the next 6 months. So one is a report on sort of the sustainable, innovative financing that could come to CBS sector. That should be out in the next couple months. We also have a report that'll be coming out that we did with EY about the cost effectiveness of CBS as compared to pit latrines and sewers, so that you can kind of see in each of these locations of the original 6 members what it looks like. And it turns out to be very favorable in comparison to those. And then the last part, you know, being, how do we sort of put sanitation and CBS in the context of climate change, right? This is, you know, once we get through the pandemic, and we will get through the pandemic, but there will be another pandemic, and the chances that we have more pandemics is actually increased by climate change. So climate change is sort of that background element right now, but it is the big thing we're facing. So how do we engage and actively work towards that? So those are sort of the elements. I think that I said 4 there. The financing, the regulation, the policy, and how it fits into climate.
Thank you, Kory. You know, you've weaved together a beautiful story there of both the solution of container-based sanitation for access to sanitation, but also for the circular economy and the resources that can be produced. And I think that last point that you were making is the multiple benefits across the sustainability agenda. So thank you very much for outlining the benefits of container-based sanitation, and also what's needed for scale. And we look forward to working together with you on that in the next weeks and months and years to get container-based sanitation to scale. Thank you. Namaste.
Excellent. Thanks so much.